Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something that affects all of us, money, but maybe not in the way you usually think about it, like spreadsheets and math.
Right. We're diving into the psychology of money, using insights from, well, a really compelling book on the topic.
And our mission here is to unpack some of the most important ideas, to help you understand why we all behave the way we do with our finances, and hopefully how to make, well, slightly better decisions.
Exactly. And the core idea, the real foundation for everything is this. Being good with money isn't so much about what you know. It's not the formulas or the data.
Okay.
It's much more about how you behave. And that behavior is driven deep down by psychology, your own personal history, the experiences you've had.
Okay, let's jump right into that.
Hmm.
Behavior over knowledge. Because, yeah, when you think finance, you picture numbers, right? Calculations, economic models.
Mhm.
But the argument here is that psychology and history are actually like much better tools for understanding money.
Totally. Think about trying to understand why someone's buried in debt. You could study interest rates, sure.
Right. The math.
But that doesn't tell you about the person. To really get it, you have to look at the human side. Things like greed, maybe, or insecurity, optimism even. That explains the why behind the numbers.
Or that classic example, why do people sell stocks right at the bottom of a crash? Logically, expected returns are higher then.
But it's not logical, is it? It's that gut feeling, that sheer panic of watching your future potentially evaporate, worrying about your family's security. That's pure psychology, not math.
It's just human nature repeating itself. Voltaire said something like, history never repeats itself. Man always does.
That applies perfectly here, especially with financial behavior.
And what the source really gets into, which I found fascinating, is how incredibly powerful our own personal experiences are in shaping how we see money.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Everyone has this unique lens, right, built from their own life. So what seems absolutely bonkers to one person
Yeah.
might make perfect sense to someone else, just because their background, their experiences are totally different.
Like growing up really poor versus, say, the child of a wealthy banker. Their ideas about risk and reward are going to be worlds apart.
Definitely. Or living through hyperinflation versus stable prices
Right.
totally changes how you think about holding cash.
Or even being a stockbroker during the Great Depression compared to someone working in tech in the late 90s boom.
And it's not just personal, it can be national too. The book mentions Australians who haven't had a recession in like 30 years. For an American, that's hard to even imagine. It shapes a different financial psyche.
Even your birth year. Someone born in 1970 saw stocks just go nuts in their formative years.
Right. While someone born in 1950 saw mostly stagnation during that same period, those early experiences hardwired different expectations.
So the takeaway is every financial choice someone makes kind of makes sense to them in that moment based on their story.
Yeah. Take lottery tickets. Americans spend, what, more on lottery tickets than movies, games, music, sports, and books combined.
That statistic is wild.
And it's mostly lower-income folks spending what could be their safety net on these, incredibly low probability bets.
Which seems completely irrational if you just look at the odds, so why?
Because from their perspective, given their experiences, it might feel like the only shot they have. Or it's just a small bit of hope, an affordable dream. It checks certain boxes for them, even if it looks crazy from the outside.
That connects directly to the next big point, doesn't it? The role of luck and risk. We don't like to talk about it much.
No, we don't. The source uses that really powerful story of Bill Gates and his school friend, Ken Evans, both super smart, both obsessed with computers early on.
But Gates had the unbelievable luck to go to Lakeside, one of the only high schools in the world with a computer back then. Pure chance.
And Evans, just as talented, tragically died in a mountaineering accident before he even really got started. One got a lucky break, the other got hit by awful random risk, life roulette.
And if you really accept how powerful luck and risk are, it has to change how you judge success and failure, yours and other people's.
Exactly. Outcomes are rarely just about the quality of the decisions. There's always that element of chance, good or bad.
I think Robert Shiller, the Nobel economist, said the thing he most wishes he knew was the exact role luck plays. It's almost impossible to untangle.
Yeah, it's tricky. You don't want to dismiss skill, obviously.
Uh,
And saying someone else was just lucky sounds like sour grapes.
and saying you're just lucky feels weirdly undermining.
Right. But the data points to it, like income correlation between brothers is stronger than for height or weight. That suggests factors beyond just individual effort are huge. Systemic things, luck.
So maybe learning only from the extreme outliers, the billionaires, the spectacular flameouts isn't that helpful.
Probably not. Their stories are often dominated by extreme luck or extreme risk. You're better off looking for the broader patterns, the stuff that applies more generally.
And failure. It can be a bad teacher if it convinces you a good decision was terrible just because you got unlucky with the risk.
The key is setting things up so you can survive the inevitable bad breaks. Stay in the game. That survival mindset also means being more forgiving when others fail, understanding that risk plays a role.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. The book talks about something it calls the hardest financial skill. What is it?
Oh, this one hit home for me. It's getting the goalpost to stop moving.
Meaning if your expectations just keep rising every time you achieve something financially.
You're basically on a treadmill. You never feel like you have enough. There's no endpoint, no satisfaction.
Happiness equals results minus expectations, right? If expectations always match or outrun results, you're stuck. You need that sense of enough.
And the big killer of enough is social comparison. Constantly looking at what others have.
Like that rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year, objectively rich.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rich by almost any standard. But if he's comparing himself to Mike Trout's $430 million contract, he feels poor. The benchmark just keeps moving up.
And the danger of never having enough of that moving goalpost is you can't say no. You can't resist chasing the next dollar regardless of the risk.
The book uses the story of Rajat Gupta, hugely successful, incredibly wealthy, chairman of McKinsey on the board of Goldman Sachs.
Had everything. Way more money than he could ever reasonably need.
And yet he allegedly got involved in insider trading, risked his entire reputation, his freedom, everything, for what amounted to, relatively speaking, peanuts. Maybe $17 million in illicit profit.
Just because the goalpost had moved, he couldn't resist grabbing more, even though it put everything else in jeopardy?
Seems like it. It's a stark reminder. Some things are just never worth risking, no matter the potential gain. Your reputation, freedom, family, friends, happiness.
Gupta apparently said something after prison about learning not to be too attached to accomplishments, a hard lesson learned.
Okay, this next one is huge. Maybe the most counterintuitive thing in the whole discussion.
Yeah.
Compounding, and specifically the role of longevity.
Right. We all know compounding is powerful, but we focus on getting the highest rate of return.
But the book argues Warren Buffett's genius isn't just his investing skill. His real secret weapon is time. He's been doing it consistently for, 75 years?
Gives that thought experiment they did. It really illustrates the point.
Okay, imagine Buffett earned his actual fantastic average annual returns, but he only invested from age 30 to 60, then stopped.
Okay. A normal career length.
His net worth wouldn't be tens of billions. It would be maybe $12 million.
Wow. So like 99.9% of his wealth came after age 60.
Effectively, yes. It's all tied to the base he built early and the decades and decades he let it grow. It's the longevity.
That's mind-blowing.
And contrast him with Jim Simons from Renaissance Technologies. Simons had way higher average returns, like 66% a year, versus Buffett's 22%.
Insane returns.
But over a much shorter time frame. The book calculates that if Simons had achieved his 66% returns for as long as Buffett has been investing, his net worth would be some absurd number like $63 quintillion.
Basically an unimaginable number.
Right. It just shows that time is the variable our brains struggle with. Good returns sustained for a very, very long time trump incredible returns for a shorter period.
So the goal shouldn't just be getting rich, but getting good returns you can stick with for the longest possible time.
That's where compounding really goes wild.
And sticking with it means you have to survive. They contrast Jesse Livermore, the famous trader who made a fortune shorting the 1929 crash.
But kept taking bigger risks, used leverage, and eventually lost everything and died broke.
Right, versus someone like Abraham Jermansky, who was ruined in that same 29 crash and essentially disappeared. Jermansky's story ended then. Livermore survived financially for decades longer, but ultimately ended in ruin because he couldn't ensure his own long-term survival.
Survival is the foundation. And the sources say that requires humility, knowing your gains can vanish. A healthy fear, understanding ruin is possible. And frugality, accepting luck, plays a role, so you don't get complacent.
Which leads right into the next point. Getting rich versus staying rich. They're different skills.
Totally different. Survival is paramount for staying rich. They tell the story of Rick Guerin, who was apparently just as smart as Buffett and Munger, part of their early crew.
Yeah.
But he was in a hurry. He used a lot of margin, leverage, and when the market turned down in the 70s, he got wiped out. Had to sell his Berkshire shares cheap. Ironically, to Buffett.
Ouch. He didn't survive the downturn.
Exactly, which highlights the often overlooked value of just holding cash.
Yeah, we see cash earning next to nothing and think it's a drag.
But its real value isn't the interest rate, it's the optionality.
Huh.
It's preventing you from being forced to sell your other investments at the absolute worst time during a panic. Avoiding that one catastrophic forced sale can be worth more over your lifetime than picking tons of winners.
So planning is crucial, but maybe the most crucial part of the plan is planning for the plan to go wrong.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
You need flexibility. You need savings for stuff you can't anticipate. You need a timeline that isn't rigid.
This sounds like Benjamin Graham's margin of safety.
It is. And it's not just about being conservative. It's about building in a buffer so that you can still succeed even if things don't go perfectly. It increases your odds of survival, making the probable possible.
Like Bill Gates keeping enough cash at early Microsoft to cover payroll for a year with zero revenue. Not optimal on paper, but incredibly reasonable paranoia.
And you can't just think about the technical margin of safety, like how much your portfolio can drop. You have to consider the emotional margin of safety. Meaning, watching your portfolio get cut in half might be survivable on paper, but can you psychologically handle it without panicking and ditching the plan? There's often a gap between what you can technically endure and what you can emotionally endure.
Room for error acknowledges all that uncertainty, randomness, plain old chance. You need that gap between what you think will happen and what could happen.
Right, so you can live to fight another day.
Yeah.
You're never so right you can afford to bet the farm.
And leverage debt. That just shrinks your margin of safety, doesn't it?
Dramatically. It turns normal market bumps into potential catastrophes. It makes people systematically underestimate risk because they're focused on the potential upside.
They use that weird WWII anecdote about German tanks being stopped by mice chewing wires.
Yeah. Unforeseeable, almost ridiculous risks happen. Avoiding single points of failure, having that cushion, protects you from the stuff you couldn't possibly predict. Everything that can break will eventually break.
So saving money just for unexpected stuff is a core part of having a margin of safety. If your plan only accounts for the risks you know about, it's probably not robust enough for the real world.
Okay, here's another really interesting concept that explains a lot. Tails drive everything.
What does that mean, the tails?
It refers to the extreme ends of a distribution curve. In finance and business, it means that a very small number of events or investments account for the vast majority of the results.
Like in venture capital, most startups fail.
Right. A few do okay, but the entire fund's return usually comes from one or two massive home runs, the extreme positive tail.
And it's similar in the stock market overall.
Yeah, the sources cite studies on the Russell 3000 index. Most stocks are mediocre or worse. Many lose value or just disappear. But a tiny fraction of huge winners drives almost all the long-term gains of the index. They mentioned Kuroko Pictures' huge hits, Rambo, Terminator 2, but still went bankrupt. Failure is common.
Even inside big successful companies, like Amazon's success isn't from every product working. It's overwhelmingly from AWS and their core retail, offsetting hundreds of failures like the Fire Phone.
Or Apple and the iPhone. That one product drove insane returns.
So the implication is it's actually normal for most things to not work out.
Exactly. If you're a great stock picker, you'll probably still be wrong, or just okay most of the time. If you're a business leader, most new initiatives might fail. Success comes from the few things that work really well.
That's comforting in a way, because we see the highlight reels of successful people, the big wins, and think our own failures mean we're messing up.
But they probably failed just as often. They were just maybe more right, or the impact of their wins was bigger when they were right. George Soros had that quote about it not being whether you're right or wrong.
But how much you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
Precisely. So the big takeaway is, get comfortable with a lot of stuff not working. Judge your overall financial performance by the whole portfolio, not individual bets. Having a few huge winners and a lot of duds isn't failure. It's often the best case scenario because tails drive everything.
Okay, let's talk about what money is actually for. What's the real benefit? The sources argue it's not just buying stuff.
Right. This is maybe the most profound point. Money's greatest intrinsic value, they argue, is giving you control over your time.
Autonomy, freedom, flexibility.
That's it. True financial independence comes from the wealth you don't spend. Unspent assets create options.
Like being able to take a sick day without worrying about money.
Or waiting for the right job instead of grabbing the first one. Choosing your hours. Retiring when you want to, not when you have to. freedom from that constant background hum of financial anxiety.
And the argument is that using money to buy back your time gives you a happiness boost that very few luxury goods can match.
They share a story about someone doing a high-paying investment banking internship. Sounded great on paper, smart people, important work.
But the reality.
Brutal hours. Zero control over their schedule. Completely miserable. That experience drove home how valuable just controlling your own time is.
Or the friend who became a doctor, achieved a lifelong goal, but found the stress and lack of control made it an awful career in practice.
Yeah, the lived reality didn't match the abstract goal. Derek Sivers, the CD Baby founder, said something similar. Becoming rich wasn't as life-changing as just gaining independence early on.
It highlights that weird paradox. The U.S. is the richest country ever, yet Americans report high levels of financial stress.
The suggestion is we used a lot of that wealth to buy bigger stuff, fancier stuff, but often traded away control over our time in the process. And time control is a huge driver of well-being.
And that control might have actually decreased for many, right? With modern jobs demanding more mental engagement, even outside work hours.
Absolutely. Work bleeds into life, which connects to the difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Rich is visible. The fancy car, the big house, that shows income.
Right. Wealth is what you don't see. It's the unspent assets, the savings, the investments that provide that flexibility, the control over your time. It's having options, not just things.
The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That's the goal.
And while getting people to save money can be tough.
Yeah, people think they can't or don't need to.
Saving is actually more controllable than chasing high investment returns. You can decide to save more today. You can't force the market to go up tomorrow.
It's like energy efficiency versus finding more oil. Improving efficiency, using less, is often more impactful and achievable. Savings is financial efficiency.
Saving is basically creating a gap between your ego and your income, right? Beyond basic needs, a lot of spending is just keeping up appearances or satisfying ego.
So dialing back the ego, being a bit more humble, is a direct way to save more.
It's a powerful lever. People who build lasting wealth often just don't care that much what others think about their car or their house.
That control over time, those options, it's like an unseen return on wealth. You can't calculate it easily, but it's incredibly valuable.
Especially now, maybe. In a world where information is everywhere and edges are hard to maintain, having control over your own time might be one of the most durable advantages you can have.
So if our behavior is so driven by psychology and experience, does that mean trying to be perfectly rational with money is pointless?
The sources argue, yeah, maybe perfectly rational isn't the right goal. Aiming to be pretty reasonable is probably better.
Reasonable, not rational. Why the distinction?
Because what's perfectly rational on paper can be completely unsustainable for real humans. They use that wild historical example of the doctor treating syphilis by injecting patients with malaria.
Oh.
Rationally, it kind of made sense in his framework, fight one disease with another you can treat. But imagine suggesting that. It's terrifying. People fight fevers because they feel bad, not always because it's the proven optimal medical strategy. Human experience matters.
So in finance, the best strategy, according to a spreadsheet, might be one you could never emotionally stick with through thick and thin.
Exactly. Academics can model complex strategies that maximize theoretical returns, but if they involve gut-wrenching volatility or levels of risk that keep you up at night, you'll likely bail at the worst time. It's useless in practice. Harry Markowitz, who basically invented modern portfolio theory, admitted he just held a simple, diversified portfolio himself because it helped him sleep.
They mentioned a study arguing young people should use tons of leverage because even if they get wiped out, mathematically, they'd recover and end up ahead long term.
Right. Rational on paper, maybe. But who can actually lose everything and then just calmly start the exact same strategy again? It's completely unreasonable from a human perspective.
So sometimes being unreasonable is actually the reasonable thing to do.
Kind of. Or at least acknowledging your human biases. They even suggest trying to love your investments. If you genuinely believe in the companies you own, you're more likely to hold on during downturns. Losing money on some abstract ticker symbol feels way worse.
Making decisions emotionally durable, reasonable.
Okay, let's talk history. It's important, but the sources caution against relying on it too much as a predictor for finance.
Because finance isn't like geology. It's driven by people who are messy and emotional.
Exactly. So just because you lived through something or studied it doesn't mean you can forecast the future accurately. It might even make you overconfident.
assuming the next crisis will look just like the last one. Michael Batnick made that point about interest rates, right? Past patterns don't guarantee future ones.
And there are two big dangers the sources highlight with leaning too heavily on history. First, you might overweight the really rare outlier events, the once-in-a-century storms that probably won't repeat exactly.
In second,
You might miss massive structural changes that make the past fundamentally different from the present or future.
like retirement planning. The advice today has to be different because 401ks and Roth IRAs didn't even exist a few decades ago.
Or venture capital. It barely existed 25 years ago. How startups get funded now is a totally different ballgame. Historical data on failure rates might not apply.
Even the big stock indexes change composition, like the S&P 500 adding financials in the 70s. The playing field shifts.
So the most reliable lesson from history is probably that surprises will keep happening, and they'll be the things that move the needle most. Kahneman's point, the world is surprising.
They trace that chain reaction from 9/11 to the housing bubble to the student loan crisis. Completely unexpected links.
It's a powerful illustration of how unpredictable consequences can cascade.
Okay, let's talk about market returns. The sources say they aren't free. There's a cost.
Right. And the price isn't paid in dollars directly. It's paid in an enduring volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, regret. All that's psychological stress.
And trying to get the returns without paying that price, like trying to time the market perfectly, usually backfires.
Almost always. People jump in and out, trying to dodge the downturns, catch the
Yes,
rallies.
end up underperforming the actual investments they hold. Data shows this consistently. By trying to avoid the price, volatility, they end up paying twice, missing returns.
Companies do it too. GE's obsession with smooth earnings under Welch, trying to avoid short-term bumps, arguably led to bigger long-term problems. Fannie and Freddie did similar things. That urge to avoid volatility is strong.
So the mental trick is to reframe volatility.
Exactly. Don't think of it as a fine, a penalty for doing something wrong. Think of it as a fee, the price of admission you willingly pay to get something valuable.
Like buying a ticket to Disneyland. You pay the fee because you expect the experience to be worth it. Volatility is the fee for potentially higher long-term returns than safer assets.
The hard part is convincing yourself the fee is worth it and then actually paying it consistently, not just enduring it until you break.
Another tricky area. Assuming there's one single rational price for any given asset.
Yeah, that ignores a crucial reality. Different investors are playing totally different games, different goals, different time horizons.
So the right price for, say, Google stock depends entirely on whether you're investing for 30 years or trading it for the next 30 minutes.
Absolutely. The price that seems crazy high to a long-term value investor might make perfect sense to a short-term momentum trader just riding the wave.
Like during the dot-com bubble, Yahoo's valuation was nuts based on fundamentals.
But perfectly logical if your game was just, will someone else pay more for it next week?
And bubbles really cause damage when people forget what game they're playing and get sucked into playing someone else's short-term game.
That's a key point. You have to be crystal clear about your own game, your goals, your time frame, your tolerance for pain, and make sure your actions align with that, not with what people playing a different game are doing.
Let's touch on pessimism versus optimism. Why does pessimism seem so much more common and, frankly, persuasive?
It grabs your attention, doesn't it? Tell someone things are going to be okay, they might nod. Tell them they're in danger, they lean in. Bad news just sells better.
Pessimistic forecasts get way more headlines, even if they turn out wrong time after time.
And the sources give a few reasons why. 1, money is universal. A financial crisis hits everyone, everywhere, unlike a localized natural disaster. So financial pessimism gets a huge spotlight.
2, pessimists often just extrapolate current negative trends forever, ignoring our ability to adapt and innovate. Remember peak oil.
Right. Prices went up and boom, we invented fracking and found way more oil and gas. Problems create incentives for solutions.
And 3rd, progress tends to happen slowly, gradually, almost invisibly, like compound growth. Setbacks, crashes, disasters, job losses happen suddenly and loudly.
The short, sharp sting of pessimism is more memorable than the slow, steady hum of optimism, even if optimism has been the more powerful force historically.
This really connects to the power of stories and narratives in our financial lives.
Absolutely. None of us has a complete picture of how the world works, especially complex systems like finance. So what do? We fill in the gaps by creating narratives, stories that make sense to us.
Even if the stories are incomplete or wrong, like a toddler making up a simple story about where their parent goes all day.
We do the same thing as adults. History itself isn't just facts, it's a narrative we construct. Kahneman calls it the illusion that the world makes sense. We crave explanations, even simple ones.
And in finance, those narratives can be dangerous, leading to overconfidence maybe, or following someone else because we've told ourselves a story about why they're right.
For sure. Acknowledging how much you don't know, how much is out of your control, is really hard. It's much more comforting to believe we have a narrative that explains things and gives us a sense of control.
Kahneman also pointed out we focus so much on our own plans and skills, we forget about all the other players on the field and the huge role of just plain luck.
And here's a specific psychological bias that messes with long-term plans. The end of history illusion.
Meaning, we think we've basically finished changing, that the person we are now is the person we'll always be.
Pretty much. We underestimate how much our goals, desires, even our core personality will evolve over decades.
Think about your childhood dream job versus what you want now, or how priorities shift from career focus to family focus to maybe retirement security. We're constantly evolving.
Statistics show it. People change careers, get tattoos removed, divorce people they rush to marry. We are works in progress.
Which creates a challenge for long-term finance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Buffett's success relies on consistency over decades, but most of us don't want the same things for decades.
Exactly. Maybe life isn't one long block. Maybe it's several distinct chapters with different priorities.
So those extreme financial plans, living like a monk to retire super early, or working yourself to death for luxury, might be based on what your current self wants, but your future self might regret it deeply.
Very likely. People adapt to the upside. The luxury feels normal, but the downsides, no savings, lost time, stick around. Aiming for moderation, a balance of savings, free time, family, probably increases the odds you'll stick with a plan and avoid major regrets.
And being willing to change your mind is key. Don't get tracked by sunk costs. I've put so much effort into this plan already.
Right. Abandoning a goal set by a different version of yourself isn't failure, it's wisdom. Kahneman's line again, I have no sunk costs. Powerful idea.
Okay, near the end here, a simple but crucial reality check. Most things are just harder in practice than they seem in theory.
Yep. Sometimes it's because we're overconfident, sure. But often it's just underestimating the sheer complexity, the conflicting demands, the messy human element of actually doing something in the real world.
Like the GE example under Immelt. Easy to criticize the stock price from the outside.
But incredibly difficult to actually manage that sprawling, complex beast with all its competing pressures. Things get tangled fast.
Which brings us full circle, really, back to that core idea. No one is crazy.
Because everyone's experiences are different. Everyone's perspective is unique. We're all operating based on what makes sense through our own personal lens.
They mentioned that article, How Doctors Die, observing that doctors often choose less aggressive end-of-life care for themselves than they recommend for patients.
It's not hypocrisy. It just shows that when it's you, your family, facing complex emotional decisions, there's no single right answer. Only what feels right for you.
And that feeling, that psychology, drives so much. So let's quickly recap some of those key lessons.
Okay, less ego, more wealth saving is about managing ego. Wealth is about options. Manage money to sleep at night. Prioritize reasonable over purely rational if it means you can stick with it.
The long tail of compounding requires time and survival. Be okay with lots of things failing. Judge the whole portfolio.
Use money to gain control of your time. That's the highest dividend. Pay the price volatility is the fee for market returns. Accept it.
Worship room for error. It builds resilience. Avoid extremes. Your goals will change. Like risk, but fear, ruin, survive.
Define your game. Don't get swayed by others. And respect the mess. Reasonable people can disagree because their realities are different.
Finally, the sources gave some really useful historical context for why American consumers think the way they do, especially about debt.
Yeah, that post-WWII period was formative. Millions came home, fear of another depression was real, housing was short, war jobs gone, debt was high.
The response included low rates, but also deliberately jump-starting the consumer economy. Factories switched from tanks to toasters.
And crucially, cheap consumer credit became widely available. People started buying cars, houses. It created jobs and fueled growth.
And importantly, in the 50s especially, those gains were shared pretty widely. The gap between rich and poor narrowed. People's lifestyles felt more comparable across income levels. Debt wasn't seen as totally normal yet.
But then the 70s hit, stagflation, unemployment, social unrest, and global competition heated up. The economic reality started shifting.
Growth continued eventually, but from the 80s onward, it became much more uneven. The benefits flowed more to the top. Median wages flattened out.
But expectations, formed in that post-war era of shared prosperity, didn't change as fast. People still expected their lives to improve significantly, even if their wages weren't keeping up.
So how did they bridge the gap?
Debt. Household debt soared. People bought bigger houses, nicer cars, paid for rising college costs, often with borrowed money. It propped up the lifestyle expectations.
Until it couldn't anymore. That Minsky moment leading up to 2008.
Exactly. And even after the crisis, while there was some deleveraging, policies often favored asset owners, continuing the uneven gains. The reality of inequality persisted, even if the expectation of a broad, shared middle-class prosperity lingered.
That historical context really helps explain some of the psychology around consumption and debt today. Those expectations die hard.
So what a deep dive this has been. It really hammers home that money isn't just numbers on a page. It's deeply, fundamentally about human behavior.
Shaped by our pasts, by luck, by a risk, by our emotions, by the stories we tell ourselves, and the history we swim in.
And it reinforces that idea. No one is crazy. A financial choice that seems baffling to you might be perfectly illogical to someone else, given their unique story.
It really makes you think about your own story, doesn't it? What were your early experiences with money? What economic times have shaped your views? How might that be influencing you now, maybe unconsciously?
And maybe the most challenging thought to leave you with is this. If we know we changed so much over our lives, that end-of-history illusion, how can we possibly make financial plans today that our future selves won't look back on with regret?
Maybe aiming for perfect optimization based on who we are now is the wrong goal. Maybe the reasonable path is building resilience, flexibility, creating a financial life that can adapt with us as we inevitably change.
Definitely something to chew on as you navigate your own financial world.